For 140 million years, this emerald haven has been concealing hordes of hidden treasures. It swallowed up many adventurers in its time. The Borneo forest appears entirely impassable. But there's nothing it can do to stop the most ferocious of its predators, man and machine. The forest slows their progress as best it can.
Doser dulu. Nanti ada doser tarik atau didorong baru bisa. Ini tidak bisa nih kalau nggak bisa jalan dia.
Yusuf's mission is to set up a lumber camp before nightfall. But his battle with the forest has only just started.
Licin.
Licin panjang soalnya.
Iya, turunan panjang lagi.
Gimana? Licin.
Licin. Ya udah.
Behind Yusuf, two other trucks have come to a standstill.
Licin, jadi kita takut insiden. Jadi maka berhenti dulu, kita bersihkan dulu kupas, baru berani jalan lagi driver.
The bulldozer attempts to reduce the danger by scraping off the layer of earth covering the road.
Biasa aja sih. Nah itulah mata pencarian kita. Cari mana mencari makan itu.
Borneo is shared between three countries. Indonesia occupies over 2/3 of the island. Resources are abundant. Diamonds, gold, iron, petrol, coal. All these resources are exclusively exploited. Borneo is slowly dying. Its forest is stripped of its rare wood, such as teak or ebony. The procession of trucks never ends.
Tahun 2003 juga saya insiden juga patah kaki. Itu saya mau bawa loader. Netral lah, jadi saya lompat dari.
When it comes to ferrying loads 7 days a week towards ports and big cities, anything goes. Each route brings its own danger. But Borneo has even more havens with well-hidden secrets. Having been at the wheel for more than 15 years, Echo is somewhat of a veteran. It's undoubtedly his legendary cautiousness which has allowed him to stay alive.
Ya memang kita harus hati-hati lah kalau jalan ini. Lingkungan ini bahaya. Banyak orang kampung, apalagi musim buah ini bikin pondok-pondok di jalan. Takut ada insiden. Soalnya susah orang kampung di sini. Nanti kalau kena senggol kayak bermasalah. Orang sini pegang senjata semua.
Today, none of the traders disturbed the convoy's progress. But just past this turn, a much-feared obstacle stands in the way. This unstable bridge must be crossed very slowly. Echo presses the brake pedal to the floor.
Kalau jembatan yang dicor di sana yang paling kadang-kadang kita takut lewat. Besar juga jembatannya, ada 20 meter kan. Filipina yang bangun. 20 tahun ya. Cuma baru-baru sudah kasih papan yang baru. Kalau dari sini sampai di Kelawit aman sudah kering. Kopi kah? Yang becek-becek cuma itu tadi aja, tempat kita itu aja.
The brakes seem to be struggling to support the load. They're steaming hot.
Kalau kopi agak jaga jarak ya, soalnya berat betul ini.
Echo is forced to stop before his truck catches fire. The other trucks are in a similar state. One hour later, the convoy sets back off. The drivers are on edge, but they're rewarded for their ordeal with a salary of €500, 3 times higher than the country's average.
Kayak anak kuliah, ada yang SMA, ada yang SD. Ini yang kuliah sama SMA sama SD nih, yang dibiayai. Apalagi istri mau melahirkan ini, perlu biaya, mungkin mau operasi sesar. Anak kedua dari istri ketiga.
With another child on the way, Echo chooses not to take the most dangerous routes. Unlike Yusuf. He's now been carrying his house on the back of his truck for 7 hours. He's tired, but remains focused. On arrival at the delivery point, there remains a delicate maneuver. With no crane to help them, the forest workers must rely on their own resourcefulness. This embankment under the bulldozer acts as an unloading dock.
Langsung di camp belajar.
Itu kebetulan ada mobil di Somel dulu itu. Kami masih kerja Somel. Itulah kami belajar itu. Ada mobil seperti itu belajar. Lalu lama pas naik.
The houses haven't yet finished their journey. They're headed for the riverbank. The men will live in the depths of the jungle for 11 months. Their food will be basic, but they'll still be able to have fresh eggs. There remains one thing to be done, and it's rather important. The inhabitants of Borneo believe that each tree is home to a spirit. Before cutting them down, they ask for the spirit's permission, for fear of incurring their wrath. The chief of the neighbouring tribe is in charge of the offerings.
Kata na urip kata jan, na urip kata tengah, na urip kata aru.
Amongst the gifts is this pig. He's not too happy. He's sacrificed straight away. His head is given to the gods and the rest to the men. The men need not wait for a response from above. By the looks of it, it's a categorical no. The torrential rain pounds down on the camp and it doesn't come without consequence. On their days off, the men only earn half of their usual salary. But none of them would risk working with a chainsaw or driving on earth that's been turned into mud. They're left to their own devices, and there's little to do but talk. And hope that the wrath of the gods doesn't last for too long. Three days and several sacrifices later, the rain has given way to bright sunshine. This seemingly quiet village hides a terrible past. Keeping your head on your shoulders was not easy here. The Dayak tribe used to have a tradition of cutting off the heads of their enemies. The tradition was long-lasting. The last decapitation took place in the 60s. Nowadays, the only heads the Dayaks cut off are pig heads. Evangelized by American pastors, the tribe has now become a peaceful one. The Indonesian government donated these little houses in order to keep them under control. These nomadic warriors have been transformed into peaceful hunters. Ali catches live birds and resells them at markets. In Indonesia, owning birds is a sign of good fortune.
Jadi ininya pulut, ini untuk menangkap burung. Dia harus punya anti air. Jadi kalau kita pegang begini, dia lengket. Ini namanya pengantinya.
It's a verdun blue-bearded bird.
Nah, sticknya. Nah, jadi kalau burung datang, dia nanti dia hinggap di atas pulut, di sini pulut. Nah, jadi kalau kena.
The trap works if the bird sings. If it doesn't, Ali simulates a mating ritual with the help of a birdsong recording.
Nah, Nah ini biar jarak jauh burungnya tetap datang. Kalau suara yang ini suara burung manggil. Nah jadi dalam satu hari ya paling banyak 1 ataupun 2 kalau nasi bagus. Kadang-kala kami kosong.
The bird catcher now has his nephew on board with his work. Nothing beats a bit of work experience to learn the tricks of the trade. It's been a few years since Ali started catching birds in his garden. But deforestation means that birds are now rare. Ali is forced to venture further and further in the forest. His old moped is struggling. Hunting is becoming more and more costly for him.
Jadi dalam satu kali naik paling modalku 100.000 untuk uang minyak, baterai, rokok. Terus sekal apa itu paling bawa beras 1 kilo, 2 kilo, gula setengah kilo. Dalam 2 hari itu jangka 2 hari. Itu pun sisa itu kalau pulang. Bede. Anuan, bede. Kanan.
2 hours of walking later, Ali and his nephew finally find a nice clearing.
Coba tes di sini menetap ada salah ini salah. Alirnya putar. Yang jane itu tada. Jadi steknya ini panjangnya ini 10 meter.
The blue-bearded bird is on top form and starts to sing its love song.
Ya duduk agak jauh sedikit lah di sini. Untuk sambil jaga. Nah, jual ikut pinggir jalan sampai 300 yang bagus, yang mulus, enggak bulunya enggak cacat, gaji lah istilahnya. Gaji pergi nebas kebun, nebas ladang. Nah, jadi hasil dalam satu hari itu paling 50, 25 satu hari. Jadi enggak cukup untuk makan.
The wait continues. There's not a single bird in sight, and even Ali's bird has stopped singing. Time for a bit of help.
Benar ngam kenih teh. Ada semangat jane keler kenih. Keler teman. Buka raya teh. Nah.
The bird eats, but still refuses to sing a single note. So Ali resorts to his speakers, but the sound is far from natural. It's not looking hopeful. Especially seeing as, not too far away, a chainsaw is hard at work making its own music. Its racket resonates through the jungle, as does the thud of the trees falling. Borneo is living through an ecological disaster. In just 20 years, the island has lost 85% of its primal forest, the equivalent of 2/3 of France.
Di sini kayaknya tidak ada suara ini. Sini tidak ada burung. Merintis.
The Dayaks live in harmony with nature, but in just a few years, all the natural habitats will have disappeared. After 3 days of torrential rain, the woodcutters have eagerly taken up work once more. Each of them makes sure to speed up the cutting and transporting of the wood. The forest workers want to make up the wages they've lost. This giant grows 1 centimetre every year. It's taken thousands of years to grow to this size. Its wood is the hardest and densest in the world, giving it the name ironwood. Even once on the ground, it's still managing to make the woodcutters' lives difficult. The sheer weight of the tree is dragging the bulldozer towards the ravine. Even in their steel cages, drivers aren't fully protected.
Waktu kerja gini kan, nah ini kena pukul kayu, udah sembuh.
Perobatan dari perusahaan.
Udah kasih perobatan sama perusahaan. Waktu kerja gini kan, pukul kayu dari samping ini.
It's proving impossible to extricate the wood, especially as the bulldozer is now stuck. To free it, the forest must once again pay a heavy price. The woodcutters cut down a tree and slide the logs under its tracks. The battle between wood and steel lasts more than an hour. The tree will end up being turned into plywood boards. Yusuf is leaving to load up 10 tons of ironwood. But the rain has transformed the tracks into muddy trenches. The driver stays calm. He knows that getting worked up won't help. Especially as today he'll be tackling completely unexplored tracks.
Ya, ini tunggu apa dulu nih? Keluar doser ini baru kita bisa masuk. Ya, loadernya itu masih apa tuh? Masih pindahkan baik. Kita selesai pindah ke paling itu masuk. Tempatnya rusak. Oh, masih digosor jalannya tuh. Nah, jalannya masih digosor.
The ogres of the forest devour everything in their path. Bulldozers extend the path for the workers as they go along.
Cuma takutnya terbenam aja nih.
Potong dari sini lah. Ini nampaknya longsoran ini kan payah juga ini. Kita mainkan dari sini mau dirobak juga sedikit ini payah buangnya.
Each new track brings its own unknown dangers. According to the drivers, there's never been any deaths, only injuries. Each of them accepts the risks for one very important reason.
Kalau satu tahun itu Pak, kadang-kadang 80 juta itu.
Setahun.
Nah, cukup lah. Makan.
The drivers earn a fixed salary with added bonuses if they manage to transport more wood than expected. It's not looking promising for today's bonus. The bulldozer brings back bad news. The road is impassable. Unless the drivers use this technique, nicknamed the conga. His return journey promises to be eventful. He'll take on the same route from the opposite direction, fully loaded. Out of 260 million inhabitants in Indonesia, 39 million don't have access to drinkable water. But the country's development is improving exponentially thanks to the excessive exploitation of its natural reserves. The east coast of Borneo is no exception. It too has seen the extents to which humans will go in order to exploit its resources. Its seabeds are filled with black gold. The future oil wells are 150 kilometers away from the archipelago of Derawan. And the island of Maratua. The inhabitants of this coral reef are hoping that oil extraction won't pollute their unharmed lands. Rauf is a fisherman. Like Ali, the bird catcher, he's made his own equipment with whatever he could put together.
Ini namanya panah. Ini saya buat sendiri. Terus ininya kita bikin sendiri. Ininya kita buat sendiri. Ini karetnya, ini ban dalam motor. Caranya tarik gini. Bikinnya kurang lebih 1 hari.
Rauf dives into the coral reef, a whole hour away from the shore by canoe.
Ini sampai ikan sampai 5 kilo bisa. Itu jarang, paling kita dapat 1-2 ekor.
The fisherman doesn't always succeed. This marine turtle would be a fine catch, but Rauf doesn't shoot it. The villagers are all in agreement that they should protect the symbol of the island. Rauf tries another reef. It's another hour away in his canoe. With the rain and the strong currents, fatigue is setting in fast. But returning empty-handed isn't an option. But fortune favours the brave. Sometimes. 5 hours of fishing for only 4 fish.
Kita 1 bulan biasa dapat 1 juta paling banyak. Terus hasilnya ya buat anak-anak sekolah, buat makan. Pingin bahagiakan istri dan anak saya. Pingin menyekolahkan anak saya. Berarti apa yang dia inginkan bisa tercapai.
Rauf is one of a group of sea nomads named the Bayol. In the past, they navigated from island to island on their floating houses, letting the winds and currents decide their path. Then, just like the Dayaks, the government made them settle on this otherwise deserted archipelago. Without realizing that this would provide them with a certain treasure trove unlike any other in the world. Hidden right at the end of this lake. When sea levels sank 10,000 years ago, part of the sea's water became trapped here, forming this saltwater lake. Many plant and animal species are trapped here. Like these jellyfish, of which there are millions in the lake. Any diver would be forgiven for not wanting to go near them, but Rauf doesn't hesitate to pick them up.
Ubur-uburnya itu nggak nyengat, terus bisa dipegang.
The jellyfish don't have any predators in the lake. Over the centuries, their defense system has disappeared as it's no longer useful to them. In order to protect them, the Bayals have enforced strict rules.
Kita bikin peraturan untuk menjaga kelestariannya. Nggak boleh pakai pin. Kita takut nanti ubur-uburnya kena terus robek. Karena ubur-uburnya sangat sensitif. Nggak boleh loncat, Dan juga kita harus berenang, harus pelan-pelan. Nah, ubur-uburnya boleh dipegang, tapi nggak boleh diangkat ke permukaan air.
Only Borneo's neighbouring country, Malaysia, has a similar lake. With the development of tourism, this unique ecosystem is at risk of disappearing, just like Borneo's forest. Yusuf is loading up his 10 tons of wood. With such a heavy load, he's dreading travelling back on the route marked out the same morning by the bulldozers.
Pertama, jurangnya dalam-dalam. Ya jurang ini lah risikonya. Itulah risiko. Medan paling berat.
Mobil udah nggak naik, paling kalau deta ya lompat. Nah itu aja kalau lompat kadang-kadang.
Banyak sudah yang terbalik. Tapi sudah pulang semua yang terbalik.
Jadi sopir di sini
Bikin rumah itulah. Beli tanah. Beli kebun.
Every time he drives on a dangerous route, Yusuf's thoughts turn to his family, who are waiting for him 5,000 kilometers away.
Sudah punya anak satu.
di mana mereka?
Di Kelopo.
Kapan kembali pulang?
Nah, palingan tahun baru.
Kalau pulang berapa lama?
Bulan 12 ya. Baru 15 baru lagi.
Just one short month. It's rarely long enough for him to get over his exhaustion. Tomorrow, the logs will take a completely different route to reach the sea and the shipping ports. At the heart of this green hell, temperatures can easily reach 36 degrees and humidity levels verge on 100%. After 10 hours of driving, the men are exhausted. They spend 11 months on average in these simple huts. Sometimes, some of them break down and want to give it all up. It's at this point that these slaves of the forest pull together.
Jadi kawan-kawan ini semua gitu juga kamusnya. Apapun ceritanya susah payah ya cukup di laut kita angkat bareng-bareng gitu kalau bahasa Jawa.
Kalau masalah untuk keluarga ya mudah-mudahan lah keuangan ya nggak ada kurang-kurang. Berapa diminta dikasih?
Ya, maksudnya pingin cepat ada modal sedikit-sedikit, cari jalan keluar. Kan? Karena kan nggak mungkin kita seterusnya di hutan gini terus loh Pak.
Kalau ada kayunya masih bertahan, kalau nggak ada kayunya paling mundur.
Ada yang punya pendapat soal penebangan?
Nggak ada.
Taunya kami ya siap kayu TPK langsung berangkat. Kalau ya dilarang menebang hutan.
Ya, dan yang dibilang kan hutan itu termasuk paru-paru dunia juga. Penghijauan lah lingkungan kita itu. Di situ kita pun ada hutan pun kita nggak takut banjir. Situlah aku tahunya.
2013 akhir.
Ya, 2013.
Arif, berapa lama?
All these tree trunks put together weigh thousands of tons. To transport them, the trucks use gigantic quantities of petrol. The quickest and most cost-effective way of getting them to the port is by water. This job falls to the Dayak tribe. The ropes holding the raft together can easily trap their hands and feet.
Kakak saya Pak Ishak pernah terjepit seleng. Ya masuk sini, terjepit, putus hilang.
Satu ruas.
Ya.
Langsung putus gitu.
Putus ya. Jadi terpisah lah kan, putus dari sini.
The journey down to the port should be nothing more than a simple formality, but in certain places, the river twists and turns and the current changes direction. The small engine is struggling. Having put up a good fight, it eventually gives up.
Rakit hancur kan, mesin jahat nabrak di pinggir ini, hancur rakit.
Sakit kelupaan nih, menurut. Nangalir kan?
Airnya nangalir. Ini air.
Ya kalau hitungan kotornya sebenarnya ada 5 juta. Beban yang dikasih ke kita kalau kayu hilang, jadi ya kita dipotong berapa, maksudnya baru bisa lunas. Beban biayanya kita semua tanggung. Ya habis-habis di biaya Pak. Tali, BBM terutama. Kita satu kali lari gini sudah 1,5 juta itu BBM. Ya sebenarnya saya bukan senang, berhubung saya istilahnya memang anak Sungai Mantarang istilahnya kan. Jadi dari kecilnya saya tuh bisa bawa longboat. Nah, jadi setiap transportasi lewat sungai itu.
On this day, almost 30 rafts headed down the river. In this ecological massacre, it's the forestry companies who are the real winners. Once the forest has been stripped of all it has to offer, it's replaced by oil palm plantations or even entire towns. Sometimes, very rarely, Mother Nature gets her own back on the intruders. It's hard to imagine that only 20 years ago, a housing development with around 100 houses was built here. It was completely swept away in 2001 by a hurricane and the huge waves that came with it. For Argus Bay, the property developer, the dramatic event stirred his conscience.
Pak Agus menanam jangan-jangan sudah ini kurang sedikit stres kan seperti itu. Tapi akan lambat laun mereka menyadari. Sadar dengan sendirinya sekarang masyarakat ikut terlibat seperti itu.
Instead of rebuilding the houses, the builder decided to start gardening. After having removed the rubble, Argus Bay replanted hundreds of thousands of trees. They now form a green barrier which prevents the erosion of the coast.
Ini diganti. Sini tanam. Ambil tanaman ini. Bawa tanaman lagi. Ini cara menanam. Yuk, harus digali dulu. Ya, digali lumpurnya. Nah, ini
Kayak dibuang plastik.
hanya rata dengan tanah yang ada. Kalau kita di dalam lumpur begini, ini agak susah untuk ngangkat kaki. Tapi kalau ketika ada airnya mudah. Cuman saya katakan di sini ada habitat yang namanya reptil, yaitu buaya. Kurang lebih hampir 4 meter. Ini yang menjadi ancaman keselamatan jiwa kawan-kawan. Kalau ada air ketika tinggi, kita nggak bisa menjamin apakah buaya itu ada atau tidak.
Argus built his housing development within a few months. It took him 20 years to replant 100 hectares of mangrove.
Ini kurang lebih 2,5 tahun. 2,5 tahun seperti ini. 2,5 tahun.
Today, these large proboscis monkeys with their rather peculiar noses are once again repopulating the area.
Tentunya saya melihatnya di Kalimantan sumber daya alamnya cukup luas. Akan tetapi kalau pengelolaannya keliru, itu akan berdampak kepada anak cucu kita nantinya. Terus kaitannya dengan perbaikan lingkungan, ya tentunya mengeksploitasi itu tidak harus dengan mencoba dengan cara-cara merusak, gitu, tapi dengan arif yang bijaksana. Masyarakat yang lain bukan hanya untuk Kalimantan, tapi Indonesia bahkan dunia.